and welcome back to Valoranting. I do want to cuss. I personally think that is fucking bullshit. What can I do for you? What can I do for you, dudes? This is the best produced podcast I've ever been in. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Valoranting. I'm pleased to be back after a week off. We actually have Mr. Matt Mr. X is here. I don't know why you have a Mr. in there. It really throws me off.
What's wrong with my Mr.?
Go ahead and just gonna have to drop that for me, as it is confusing. So just rebrand and all that.
You want to call me Matt? That's okay with me. I'm all right. I'm all right with that. That's the name my mama gave me. I'm all right.
We have Matt, we have RyanCentral, otherwise known as Ryan, here with us as well. I believe the first time guest on Valoranting. Welcome, sir.
Yeah. I've been listening since day one. First time, long time listener, first time
caller.
What is it that people say?
First time
callers. Yeah,
I'm calling from the back of my truck in the middle of Ohio.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, sorry.
I did want to start with an apology actually to you, Moses, because I've learned a lot over the period of casting. Like, I was the proprietor of making sure that people called Fabrican by the way that they properly should. And now that it's been a while since Fabrican's not been a thing, I realized it was kind of just me being a dick, to be honest. You weren't the only person that I think that I did this to, but I've learned, and I just think that that's just probably an asshole thing to do.
I'm
so
need to quickly become outraged and retroactively outraged. So let me just dig deep and look for this moment that I definitely remember. And okay, yeah, fuck you, Ryan. Okay, I didn't even want you on the show. Anyway, welcome.
Keeps me up at night.
Of course. No, of course. No, well, it doesn't matter either way now because Fabrican has disbanded, I believe. Right? Are they still together? I can't recall if there's like a zombie shuffling corpse of Fabrican walking around.
They became Skye, didn't they? And they were the team that beat like Team Liquid in a tournament when they ran like triple duelists. I know that was Blast, but like they were a team that knocked Team Liquid out twice in a tournament. They knocked them down to the elimination bracket, but generally they've not done anything in EU since. So you could pretty much say that they're pretty extinct. And the rest went to FPX, and they're doing all right.
Oh, so they got signed back in August, according to our producer here. So they are now Skye. Yes. So there we go.
Yeah.
Or now
they play with an Overwatch player called Manitin.
There we go. Now we know what's where are they now? They are Skye, and they're knocking out Team Liquid in early bracket play of tournaments that I think probably no longer are considered canon as we move into first strike. We've actually got a lot to talk about today. I was off last week, and we have some catching up to do. So the first thing I want to talk about today are roster moves, because this is some of the news that was piling up, and I was on my honeymoon of all places, and I was just like looking at what was going on Twitter, of course, because that's what one does on your honeymoon. And I noticed that T1 has picked up Dazed, which, I mean, so I've talked to a couple of people about this, and I want to preface my opinion on this signing with the fact that Dazed is a professional player. He obviously is a part of that former iBuyPower roster that was banned from Counter-Strike for match fixing. He was unable to mount a comeback in CS. And I've talked to people that know, and they all say the same thing, that he's a good dude, he's dedicated, but when he's on. But from a forward-looking Valorant future for T1, I don't know about the whole PR angle of retreading iBuyPower and adding someone. I'm not going to say an unknown, but in the Valorant, the short history of Valorant, Dazed has not had any presence there. So we'll start with you, Matt.
Yeah, I think this is just a player they're pretty familiar with. Right, like you mentioned, the former iBuyPower player. They pick him up, I believe, the IGL for that team. Maybe now kind of the caller for this one. It's a player. Well, I kind of thought they would go in the route of kind of adding two younger, kind of like up and coming fast players to this team to kind of like up the tempo, up the speed, like get some really kind of like top notch, like, I know, mechanical skill to it, which I think they've done by adding Spyder. I don't know if Dazed exactly fits that mold. But it is somebody they're comfortable with. Maybe they kind of think the game is treading more in that direction in terms of a little bit of a slower pace, more methodical type style. So I think it's an interesting one. I think now that we actually have seen them play, they didn't look bad. I think in their kind of first showing, First Strike, I think, is really kind of like a make or break opportunity, though, for T1 as a whole.
I think so too. Ryan, what's your thoughts on the pickup for Dazed?
Well, it's one of those like what if things, I suppose, of like what would iBuyPower do if they could be together again as a full squad. Steel's gone to 100 Thieves, so we're not getting that. But I think it's one of those questions that people were like maybe pondering, but I don't think they necessarily really give a shit about the answer, to be honest. Like they'll see him in 2 tournaments and go, oh, they're not that good. Okay, next sort of thing. So the addition of Dazed, I think, is interesting in the sense of like he's an IGL. It's something that T1 desperately needed from previous tournaments. They looked very lost, changed around who was playing what agents to try and make the most of it. But kind of like what Matt said, with his addition, I was like, right there, fifth needs to be some absolute standout player. Either somebody that's, you know, brought over from Counter-Strike that's a really good like entry fragger, or somebody that can do quite a lot of work, or somebody that's up and coming, your Asunas of the world, so to speak, and get them involved in the team. Because it's very similar to like 100 Thieves, how they're set up. There's a lot of decent supportive talent around them, but there's no star player to really be the main shirt, I suppose, on the roster, the main person that you really want to see pop off. That's the thing that T1 didn't really have up until they signed Spyder, I think.
Yes, I would agree. To give you a little bit of a kind of like a backstory on Spyder, formerly known as Saya Player. Some of the Overwatch community will know him from there. He's picked up from the Florida Mayhem's team. So Florida Mayhem was an absolute disaster in year 1 of the Overwatch League. They improved to a disaster, not an absolute disaster, in year 2. Saya Player was always somebody who we knew had crazy mechanical skill, like really strong on like hit scan heroes, like a Widowmaker, like an Ashe, stuff like Soldier 76 McCree. He never saw a ton of play, though, which was incredibly odd. So you always thought he was like this incredibly gifted player, stuck on just really poor teams. And then he changes his name, gets announced here for T1's Valorant squad. Evidently, he played CSGO in Korea quite a lot. And then also he speaks almost fluent English. So there won't be any kind of like language barrier with this team. Mechanically, this guy is nuts. Like when you were talking about Ryan, they needed a player who was like as like a Dicey, like somebody who can really kind of have that firepower and like push this team over the top. Saya Player has that capability in terms of his mechanical skill. It's whether they play a style that will enable him to do that, I think, is the question.
Here's my issue, and I'm looking in the chat here, and I already know who I'm going to tilt when I say this, but I'm probably going to tilt my producer a little bit about this as well, because this is something I want to talk about a little bit later. But this is a key point. There is a big difference between a former CS professional like Android and washed up CS players that I don't want to. I mean, you know, can we call Dazed a washed up CS player? I don't want to. I feel bad. Like I don't know the man, but here's the deal. They didn't. That 3 CS players, former iBuyPower players, come together and couldn't make it work with 2 Zoomers, and then you bring in a 4th iBuyPower player and a former Overwatch player. So I guess the thinking here is that Dazed is going to somehow cast a powerful brain spell over the rest of the team. Let's say we'll exclude Spyder from this and make them faster, you know, a little bit more flexible. They're maybe going to get some more agents that they can play. Their strategy is going to speed up. We'll have to see, but I want to talk about this first look that we had at T1 a little bit down the road. I don't want to get too much into that right now. For Spyder, I mean, I think that's probably the X factor here. I would love to see how a heavy mechanical player that obviously, in your experience, Matt, has the ability to click on the mans, which is always a good start. But can he play Valorant? That's what we want to find out. So, do you have any insight for that?
I mean, they looked better in the Yeah, I mean, they looked better in the Renegades tournament. I think Skadoodle looked better than he has. You know, they had him on the jet for a lot of the time. It was interesting because a lot of us kind of before the event, like watching it, kind of thinking from the Overwatch scene, thought that Spyder was going to play something more aggressive, whether it was like a Raze or a Reyna, but they had him on the Omen this weekend for Renegades. So he looked really good, and I thought Skadoodle played some of the best Valorant we've seen from him. So I think signs were trending in the positive direction for T1. I still think at times they play a little bit too slow, which kind of hurts them against like your, upper echelon of like tier 2, tier 1 competition. But I think they are trending in the right direction. It's just where is the ceiling of this team? Like how high can they kind of climb the bar of the teams in NA?
I know where the ceiling is. It's Immortals. Anyway, we really have to stop talking about this. Let's talk about Immortals, who have picked up Neptune, JMO, and Shot Up. Shot Up actually had a bit of shine on Reddit over the last week. He had a pretty gnarly. I don't know if we have it. I don't think we have it, but he had a pretty gnarly sheriff clip up on Reddit earlier. I think in the last couple of days. So I haven't been able to keep up with the last week's events again due to honeymoon stuff. I really tried to avoid it, but apparently it's required. So
did you actually enjoy the honeymoon, or did you just looking up stuff?
Yeah,
I was trying to watch Valorant, but I had to pay attention to my new wife and eat dinner and all these other things. Anyway, so why don't you? I'm going to lean on Ryan here. Why don't you tell me a little bit about Neptune, JMO, and Shot Up there, Ryan?
Well, the majority of them came from Morning Light, which was a tier 2 team that did okay. Like they placed 4th, I think, in the Pulse Series tournament, which had a lot of tier 2 teams in it. It was one that Mamba Mode Gaming won, which for a lot of people won't know who that is. Beast Curse came 2nd. Again, it's probably a name that certainly isn't part of the tier 1 scene if you've been watching a lot of the Ignition events. So they've done okay. But as somebody that sort of saw those events, they weren't typically that standout. A lot of people were really mad at Immortals for letting Asuna and Dicey go to 100 Thieves, and then Cola dropping off to go to NRG as well.
They got a massive payday for it.
But it was one of those things where I think a lot of people don't really understand how sports work in some cases. Well, like, they can never be good again because they sold their best players, which is a topic of discussion really that looks really funny when you look at the results from the Renegades tournament. But these guys, relatively unknown, but we know from Packing 10 and Gumba what they do with Immortals when it comes to getting talent. They did it in Valiant as well, as Matt can probably attest to, with just finding new cheap talent and then selling it for a higher price down the line.
Yeah.
These guys, in hindsight, looked really, really good. And I don't think anybody expected this kind of performance, other than probably Packing 10, I think, at this point, who is one of the main scouts for Immortals and putting that team together.
Yeah, this organization kind of has a formula.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, they have a formula in how they like to kind of try out and trial players. And in Overwatch and Valorant, they pick up a team, they make a team, but they also kind of have a list of some of the other players they've tried out that they really like. And that's where a lot of these players come from. Shot Up specifically was just absolutely nuts this weekend. Definitely deserves a lot of props for getting Immortals all the way to the end.
And I understand your dog has a lot of opinions on Immortals as well.
He's the worst. So we have moved one apartment over, correct?
Right.
The apartment is directly in front of the elevator. Anytime somebody uses the elevator, he assumes they are infiltrating this room.
Yeah, but they kick the door in,
which is not the case. But that's why I have a great headset, so I don't really hear it that much. But I can hear my wife yelling from the other room, telling him to stop in a nice tone. Yeah, we'd prefer him to stop.
Better to yell at the dog who's barking, and I have 2 dogs myself, and I've learned that actually screaming at them it helps sometimes, but then they look at you and then they start barking again. So he's just doing his job. I saw the size of him; he's pretty formidable. So I wouldn't want to be breaking into your house as well.
He will run in, look at me. He will run in, look at me, and then he will run back out and start barking again.
Are you not aware here? Of the danger?
Elevator again.
How can you be so calm?
So we were talking a little bit about Spyder and his time in Overwatch, and Overwatch has been I'm not going to say bleeding talent, but they are certainly not retaining everybody. And obviously, there's a lot at play with the off season right now in Overwatch League. A lot of players are finding themselves out of work, and this kind of feels like now the great exodus of, I'm going to say, tier 1.5 and tier 2 Overwatch players starting to leak down into Valorant. But I'm not by any means a Overwatch League pro. Follow the league at all, or know anyone other than maybe the original players like AKM and guys that were signed when Overwatch was new. So we have Trill and AKM moving over, and I'm going to lean on Matt for this one pretty heavily. Tell me about these two players.
Yeah, so I mean, AKM's kind of like a historical Overwatch player. A lot of people kind of know him from Rogue, like at the beginning of the game. Played a little bit for the Dallas Fuel last year, but didn't play at all this season. Neither of these players, I mean, maybe Trill played like a game or two, but AKM did not play. Unko really didn't play outside of like earlier in the season. I think some of the players you've seen swap over since like the Sinatras and the Corys of the world and like Baby Bay, I would say, were more kind of like trending on the borderline of still being like Overwatch League talent in the terms of like they may have been on a roster, but they probably would have been, you know, player 8 through 12 on a roster.
Right.
So I wouldn't exactly kind of say it's like a mass like exodus of talent, because a lot of the players who are still starting and contributing at the highest level of Overwatch are still committed to playing Overwatch, right? But I think AKM, somebody who we've seen in the past have like really strong aim, could be an addition to a team in Europe. And then Trill is Australian, so it's a matter of whether he stays in NA and wants to compete here or go back and probably play in the Oceanic region, what he wants to do. But he's a tank player. I know he's put a ton of time into Valorant thus far. It's just a matter of which region he can or wants to compete in, I think.
I find it interesting. I mean, obviously, Ryan, you've got experience with Overwatch as well. And I guess I'm the observer. I'm the Reddit poster who just, you know, picks up a headline now and again and just, you know, formulates a distant opinion on the Overwatch League. But is there in your opinion, Matt or Ryan, whoever I'll lean on Matt for this one since you're quite close to the entire operation. Yeah. Is there a vibe that Valorant is like this kind of oasis in the distance? Or the pasture that you would put yourself out to when you get tired of the Overwatch grind?
Not really, because they're such drastically different games. Like a lot of the players who've swapped over, they had some kind of Counter-Strike background. Most of the player base though, like that plays Overwatch, is like fast respawn, more like TF2 arena style like shooters. So there really isn't that big of a crossover between the two games. It's kind of like they can exist in both planes and still, I think, both kind of exist perfectly fine. Where like Valorant, I view more in the line of like your Rainbow Sixes, your Counter-Strike, like games like that. Overwatch is way more fast-paced, kind of like Call of Duty-esque in a way. I think the only similarity is that they have characters with abilities, and that's about it. I mean, I think the comparison is one that you'll get because, you know, you see like Sinatra go over and play, Corey come over and play, and then like some of the other members on FaZe. But otherwise, you don't really see, there's not like anybody like the upper echelons still of Overwatch that's kind of jumping or going over. You're mostly just kind of having players who, you know, maybe their time in Overwatch is kind of done, right? And then they want a game to compete in, and Valorant is just starting, right? So you can kind of take some of the brand that you built up in Overwatch that's recognizable, maybe kind of take some of that and kind of transfer it over. But like, you know, you're not seeing the MVP of the Overwatch League this year, like Fleta, like going to go play Valorant, right? Like he's just going to keep playing Overwatch. So I think the comparison between the two is a little bit, and the competition between the two is probably a bit overblown by just kind of the Reddit social media. Ryan, yeah, I mean, but it is. But looking from the outside, right? Like you have Sinatra come over, like you have Corey come over. It is kind of like, hey, like what is this? But you know, a lot of Overwatch teams are even thinking about, you know, going more full Korean. There's a lot of great Korean players and Korean contenders. We saw so many players this year, Moses, come in from contenders in the Overwatch League and be like all-star MVP candidate type of players. So there are players just sitting around in Overwatch that can turn your team around from mediocre to top tier. That's why you kind of see a little bit of an exodus, because there are some teams who have not been competitive in years who are like, hey, we can just pick up some of these players from contenders and compete right away because they're young. They have these, large hero pools.
They have the drive.
And they have the drive, where now you'll see some of those players that are exiting try and jump into Valorant to pick that up.
This is and Ryan, I want you to jump in on this as well. It kind of feels that it's like this. They're like kind of exhaling some of the talent that I guess, and this is more of an evolution of the scene. And I hope Valorant gets to this point in the next year or two as well, where, like Matt was talking about, contenders players, they're endemic, grew up on Overwatch players, where a lot of the current pros have backgrounds in other games or have come from somewhere else over the last couple of years. And Valorant needs that engine to start churning as well.
Yes.
Once they start having Valorant players rather than former CS, former Overwatch, that kind of thing. And obviously, it's always good for the Overwatch League to start their streak of reigning MVPs not changing games this year.
That's the ideal thing. And there's been so many other players that don't have the Sinatra or Corey approach. I look at people like in EU, like Tavik and Taimu were once considered some of the nuttiest aimers in Overwatch in their region. And they're playing on teams in EU, sure, but nowhere near the level that really they could just easily be forgotten about in where they're playing, which is a real shame. I love Tavik, and I've had the opportunity to speak with him quite a lot during his Overwatch League career, but it's very difficult for them to sort of break on through. But I guess that's better for a lot of those players that wanted Overwatch to be more like Valorant, to be more aim intensive instead of more MOBA-esque things about it, with, your Reinhardts, your Moiras, your Brigittas especially, right? Like, they want less of that and more of the, if I click on somebody's head from 40 yards away, they die and I look great. It's that kind of, like, they're the players that I think would suit Valorant. But a lot of them, including AKM, who was one of the players that we mentioned, almost have like a negative vibe around them. Certainly AKM with the 4-minute Genji blade, like, he's more of a meme now, even though back in his prime, he was considered one of the best soldier hit scan players out there. So the fact that he's moving over tends to have more negative connotations than anything else, really, which is a shame for a lot of these players, because they certainly could be in for a second chance with Valorant.
I really like Moses's point about kind of fostering Valorant players. Like, I feel like that's kind of like you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, you don't really follow Overwatch, but you kind of hit the nail on the head, where like you're now starting to see players who got into playing competitively, wanted to go professionally, committed to starting that in Overwatch, start to break through, right? Where I think in Valorant, it'll take a while for that to develop, but it's so important for some of those tier 2 players in Valorant to get a shot at like the tier 1 organizations. And you already see like Immortals, right? They're letting 2 players go, 3 players go, being able to recruit 3 players right out of tier 2 and compete straight away. And I think this happens with any new game that comes out and has like a large kind of esports promise straight away. I remember casting Overwatch when AZK was playing for Team Liquid. Like, it just happens when these games come out. So I think it'll take a few years, but I agree. I think it's extremely important that as time goes on, we get players and into the scene who are here to play Valorant, not just to kind of try their hand at competing in the next game.
Yeah, salvage whatever whatever position they are in their respective esports career. And one thing I'd like to cap on this as well that I hope becomes more of a factor is if Immortals, for instance, of their new signings, is able to churn out a couple of more tier 1 level players that they can either I'm going to say sell off in the kindest terms possible. They sell these players off to tier, like, I don't want to say that Immortals isn't a tier 1 organization, but they weren't competing at that level, so they say, well, we might as well churn a little profit here. But I would love to see more attention being paid to the people on the Immortals team who's scouting these players, because those types of players, as esports continue, or so those types of personnel as esports continues to evolve, are going to be very, very important. because that's the risk you're taking. You know, you have you have like I won't say an experiment, but like a team like T1 or the original 100 Thieves. I think the original 100 Thieves is a much better example. These players definitely had some potential and some skill and some early success, but weren't able to hold up to the test of time and pressure as well. So if you can identify that as a scout ahead of time, you're going to save orgs a ton of money, a ton of time, and a ton of heartache as well.
Yep.
So shout out to those people out there who are doing the probably the first batch of esports talent scouts that are doing a good job and actually making their org a little bit of cash. Those people will become more valuable. We also have one more pickup here for Equinox Esports. They picked up China Nguyen. So good for them. This is a team that has stuck together through thick and thin, and they finally do get themselves a signing. We do have a video here of that signing, and we did say this in the pre-show.
First of its
but
kind.
I fully encourage all esports orgs out there to, of course, do your best, announce your rosters. I love the formula that has clearly emerged with like kill clip followed by block text, which is what we were discussing. But every single intro video lives in the looming shadow of the Team Liquid announcement video, which will never ever be topped until Liquid makes something else or something like that. Because it's great these guys got signed, but save yourself a little bit of budget. Give your video editor something else to work on, because God bless them, that Liquid video. That's the first thing I think of every time I see one of these things. But shout out to China Nguyen, who did get picked up. Matt, any thoughts on this team?
I mean, I think it's nice that they end up getting an org. I'd like to see more of some of the tier 2 teams get organizations going into First Strike. Like I think you mentioned, Ryan, like a team like a Mamba Mode Gaming, somebody like that, right? With a player like Chase who's really good. You're going to see more of these pickups as First Strike and more Riot events happen. You're going to see more of the organizations just overall start to pick up teams that have like an outside shot looking at it. So I think it's just good for the scene in general.
Ryan, how about yourself?
Wherever you've been signed, I think like China Nguyen have some really decent performances across tournaments, really like consistent. Yep. Funnily enough, this tournament they went 0-2, and the NSGxRenegades Renegades they bombed out winless. So not the best start really, but I think when you're looking at the unsigned teams, the ones that did really well, you're looking at like teams like Homeless that then became like Dignitas and stuff. I think China Nguyen had the longest consistency run when it comes to how good they can actually do. And so seeing them signed is really good. Equinox is, I think, a brand new organization, right? So when they were doing the whole signed GIF on Twitter to suggest that they were signed, I was honestly hoping for like even like an Evil Geniuses or an NRG before they announced more of their team. I certainly think that they're deserving of that credibility of those organizations. So a little bit disappointed with the org, but with any luck, they both show me up and show that they belong in First Strike, which I could see them getting to the qualifiers at least for sure.
EG's got a CS team, right? So I won't say a new CS team, but they have a CS team that's been performing well recently, correct? So does anyone else feel like it's either you have one or the other? Because 100 Thieves dropped their team pretty goddamn fast after they signed their Valorant squad to their new contracts.
Yeah, I think you saw the 100 Thieves decision just because they probably couldn't give the Counter-Strike team what they actually needed. I also think Counter-Strike is just a bigger game in Europe than NA, and if you're 100 Thieves and you're really kind of like an NA-based organization focused on growing within NA, like Valorant makes more sense right now than to have that Counter-Strike team.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of why you see that decision being made there. I think they can. I think you kind of have both. I think Counter-Strike, the every game dying because of Valorant, I think is a little bit overblown.
CS is dead, unfortunately. It has died.
Yep, non-existent anymore. Yep,
had a good
doesn't
run.
exist. Yep. So maybe they all kind of leave, but I think stuff like that is a bit overblown early on. I think you can have both teams and be perfectly fine.
I kind of believe, and this is unfortunate for Pansy, who clawed her way back into the tier 1 CS casting scene, only to have the game die
You're
right
gonna
afterwards.
trigger her
It's
beyond
just
belief.
really, it's unfortunate. Not to mention, and she did say that EG is a top 2 NACS team, and considering that there are 4 NACS teams left, that is quite the position to be in. So call me up, fucko. She says you had your chance to be on the show, and you chose the frivolous path of CS casting. So you had your shot. Ryan, what do you think about what do you think about the fact that CS is dying, and the look forward that I kind of want to talk about what Matt said. Do you feel that Valorant is going to continue to chip away at the NACS scene?
I think so. Like the one thing that I said when stuff was happening is for some reason I was like I could see a player from Team Liquid leaving to do Valorant because there were a couple of like show matches almost where the Team Liquid CS:GO team played Valorant, and I think even stuff like Elige played quite a lot during like the closed beta period. So to see Nitro go wasn't too surprising for me. We might see more. The one thing that I do think is worth adding is that EU CS just doesn't seem phased by it at all. There's been so little movement. Really, the only main ones, I suppose, were the Fish 123 guys that became Team Liquid and your Screams and Mixwells, who again were players more on the out. Players like Angel that was very much on the way out at that point with Hellraisers, right? So there's genuinely a sense of, yeah, for NACS, I could see more people being chipped away. I don't think we'll have another Nitro level player leaving, but EUCS just does not seem bothered by it at all. Probably another reason why I think NA is getting a bit better than EU at the moment.
It's because EU is so entrenched atop the CS kind of landscape that it's kind of like they don't really. I don't think they have the draw, but obviously we don't really know where everything is right now from an international land perspective because no one gets to play in them right now. So it's unfortunate. Well, I guess while CS is rapidly dying without their LAN environment, we'll have to just wait and see if they are able to recover. I don't think there's ever been a lower point in CS's history.
Oh man,
let's move. let's move on. Let's move on to Act 3. This is quite a big one. Obviously, we have the patch notes here as well. A huge patch. We have Icebox, the latest map, deathmatch changes, ranked changes, all sorts of different things. I'm going to lean on Ryan for this one. He actually had the opportunity to play through the update. Walk us through this one, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the two main brunts of stuff. The first being Icebox, the 5th map. So different to anything else that's in the game. Take that as a good or a bad thing. I'll leave it up to you because there's certainly both sides to it. But the patch had some really good stuff considering it didn't have any balance changes. The competitive updates one is specifically pretty good in the sense of before, let's say, for example, you are Diamond 1, you could have Radiance in your game because there was like 6 ranks in between you and Radiance. And you could go all the way down to Gold 1. So you could be somewhere within that spectrum of players. Now they've tightened that a little bit, so you can't, if you're a Diamond 1 player, you can't be playing with anybody lower than a Platinum. You can't be playing with anybody higher than Immortal 1. So generally, you should have more consistent games. I've certainly had more consistent games because they've been much more terrible because the higher ranks aren't in them anymore to carry my heavy ass. But it's got a lot of other bits and pieces. The deathmatch changes are super nice, but for the first patch of this act, when the map isn't in ranked rotation yet, it's a pretty beefy patch with everything else that it had in it.
I think there's a lot to be said. I mean, mostly about Icebox. I'm very concerned with the verticality on that map. That was the first thing I noticed when the map preview came out. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem nearly as predictable or have the same flow of what you would normally expect from a tactical FPS map. And really, I immediately thought of Volskaya from Overwatch when I saw the map's intro. Mostly the mid area in Volskaya. But what about you, Matt?
It reminded me of a CS map. I think it was called Season. It was like where it had this. There's like a warehouse to the left, and then you kind of have this like just ridiculous mid where I believe like the T's just kind of like flew out and then there were doors on both sides of the CT. Pansy can correct me, but yeah,
She's
season
calling
is
it
very
cash.
similar. Yeah. Uh, it's one where the verticality is going to just, I think, trigger everybody. It is one where, you know, agents like Jet, Omen, Raze, who can access that high ground, are going to be essential. And when I say essential, Omen is already at a 99% pick rate. So you're just making them even, I think, stronger. And also, it's an odd mechanic for a tactical FPS because like you mentioned, Moses, like you're kind of going on like predictability and whatnot with so many corners, and then you're adding all of those corners plus verticality. I think this is a map that early on you'll see a lot of wonky tournament results, like a lot of weird results.
It's gonna be the 5th map in the best of 5 every goddamn time as people veto the shit out of it. So
yes, this will be the final map most series.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the other changes, obviously the deathmatch changes are welcome. The deathmatch did get a lot of feedback, and to see it get changed so quickly is fine. Just good developer response there. Some competitive ranking updates as well. Those were basically universally praised with how matchmaking will work there. So we did cover that last week as well. But what I want to talk about is the observer changes as well. Now we also have 12 observer slots, which for us in this panel, we always love to see because observer limitations in Valorant so far has been a bit of a sore spot for observers and casters alike. And now we're able to have basically eyes on all of the players in the server, plus 2 free floating cameras for setups and that kind of thing. So for observers and the ability to show the action, to be able to hotkey and to bring up a specific player all the time based on observer is going to make the directors' lives out there and the viewing experience much better. So great to see there. We also have the observer getting flashed. So you have the new flash indicator for the observer, which again, and we're all pros here. We all know this, and Matt can speak to it. Ryan can speak to it. You need to be able to illustrate in the spectator experience as best as you can what the player is experiencing. That way, you have better context. There's no confusion. And if only we could learn to turn off the silhouettes now and again, we would be in good shape. We also have the battle pass. The battle pass is extended. It is bigger and badder than ever. There's more things to do. And by God, if Riot hasn't taken at least a little bit of your money yet, they are going to with this battle pass. Getting value for your money, especially when it comes to unlocks and replayability. These things like the battle pass are going to be one of the best ways to recoup that free to play cost of development and all that kind of thing. So
free to play
not to
until you
mention
spend
Riot does a great
$200.
job with skins. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah, it's free to play until you spend $200 in game.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, the same thing with League of Legends. I'm like, oh, it's free, so I can buy these skins, and then you check your account, and it's like, yeah, you spend $1,200 on this game. It's like, I mean, it's kind of it's the model, but I think like you mentioned, like Riot, like constantly delivering on the quality of skins, and like the skins in the battle pass are really strong. They're really high quality, but then they also put those bundles in the shop that are $100 a pop, and everybody in my game seems to have them. No issues. So I like that the model is clearly working here.
Absolutely. There's a little bit of chatter about coaching slots being added as well. I
do have something about that.
Okay, go ahead.
Because it was one of the talking points in the playtest, because the cool thing about the Riot devs actually is that they sit down with like literally all of the people in there, and you've got like Mixwell and stuff asking people like Volcano questions about the map and all the stuff that's come in. There was a lot of stuff that was said in good faith about when stuff was coming generally, and I don't want to reveal too much. From what I know, there's just going to be more cool stuff for observing coming in, probably with a Skye patch if I was to guess. But they did say that coach specs is something they're looking into, but probably something that we're not going to see for quite a bit of time. So I think I just wanted to start, because I know a lot of pros and stuff watch this as well, and I've been trying to get that out there. It's like they know they wanted to work on it, but probably similar to what Mike said in chat, where they don't want to have another Counter-Strike spectating bug on their hands. So they're going to try their best to just go about it the right way. It sucks. A lot of coaches have to watch players through Discord streams just to see what the hell is going on, because teams don't want to have them in spectating slots to see the other team's strats, for example. So it's not ideal, but Riot know, and they've done a really good job of communicating that for the most part. At least I think.
And there's going to be, and you know, in the same way that there's Overwatch players looking to make the move, and Counter Strike players making to look the move, I think there's probably more than a few coaches out there in the CS landscape who are considering their options very carefully and would be very interested in a Valorant coaching or observing slot in the server. Shout out to Other Moses. May his career continue at the pace that it's going. I feel actually the worst for him with this whole coaching scandal. Especially since Pansy was waiting above him, hanging upside down like a bat, ready to jump into his chair so quickly. So as far as the changes in in this patch are concerned, a lot of upside, but we have the Icebox being kind of the focal point. This is something that I wanted to jump into a little bit more in depth. Ryan, again, from the play testing that you were able to do. Let's run through some of the video here that we have of this new map. Was there anything that you experienced or noticed that you think is interesting or potentially problematic with Icebox?
I think it's interesting because the first reaction I saw that I took notice of was artists saying, to quote, it was dog shit, which is typical artists, to be fair. But also Shroud did a video on it saying that this is what a Valorant map should be, which I thought was actually kind of surprising to have that reaction. What I do like is Pansy mentioned Cache, and it's very similar. And that's the thing that I love about it. What I like about maps like Cache is going through mid, using the boost to get through vents and you're on to B. There's a lot of going through a certain area of the map that can get you very easily to one of the sites. And if you're a defending team not watching that, you're going to get caught out and surprised, which is something that you don't really see too much of in some of the maps. Certainly the ones like Bind and Ascent, which get accused, I guess, of being a bit samey. You can't really say that about Icebox. It's so different to all of the other maps in the games. But I feel like I use the analogy, it's like if you're playing Theme Park World or Roller Coaster Tycoon, and you just make this like batshit crazy roller coaster with like 20 loop-de-loops and all of these turns, and it's 20 miles long. And then the people riding it say that it's awful because it makes them feel sick. That's Icebox. There's just too many like bells and whistles, too many corners to check. Verticality is a bit much. It's just everything dialed up to 11. And I think if it was just toned back a little bit, it would probably be one of the better maps in the game. It's just too much. I mean, look at it. It's just so much stuff.
So I don't know if we have. Oh yeah, here we go. Here we have the zipline potential. I saw some clips of people jousting on it, which I think would make for a. We talked about this in the pre-show, Matt. Would make for a great knife round where you just have you have like teams on both sides. And they kind of battle. Yeah, exactly like this.
This is absurd.
Yeah. So just you have all 5 players on both sides, and whoever comes out on top of the knifing joust battle, you know, that's what's up.
I think with this map as well, they do want to push the boundaries in terms of agent design and map design of like what you and I think all of us think like a traditional tactical FPS is. I think this map does all of that, like by just verticality. I mean, that stuff like you see in games like Overwatch, right? To the fast pace, like and Respawn, you can have that verticality. One thing I noticed right away when playing it on defense on the B side, you can push up like so far, like the spot wall, like you can just basically go all the way around that yellow crate all the way up. And then on
this reminds me of that arena map with like the in Overwatch as well, the 1v1 map with oh god, I can't remember anything. It's been so long.
There's well, it's the kind of like the art design reminds you of Skye, like you mentioned, right? Yes. It's like a Russian snow base, like lots
ambiguous,
great
industrial.
Yeah, industrial. It'll be interesting when this goes into tournament play, kind of what the reaction is then. I also think we haven't seen it played at like a high competitive level without Skye and even with Skye, where the game will just kind of flip on its head again. My gut though is kind of the same with you, Moses, that this is like a map 5 in like each series, right? It's like both teams probably don't want to play this straight away. that I think it'll take a lot of time for players to adjust and warm up to this level of verticality. It's also a huge map. Like the rotations from site to site, like it takes so long from like A to B. It's just nuts. I mean, you can see on the overhead map here, it's just a lot of, and all of that rotation is just like little hallways and corners and stuff, vertical boxes. It's gonna be a very, very odd map to watch at first.
I wonder what the pickup rate is going to be like compared to a map like Ascent, if you know what I mean. Like I think Ascent was one of those maps where like, oh, it's got an interesting mechanic to it. Like, you got this door you can shut down, and you have this interesting approach to the B site. But players picked it up relatively quickly. In my opinion, this map is going to take much longer to pick up because there's so many more variables. And I really expect that it's going to be the least favorite choice of pros for quite some time. Ryan, you got something to add?
Yeah, you mentioned the gimmicks, and this is something that like before people could actually play it, because there was like a week or like about 5 days between the map being shown off and people getting it in the patch. A lot of people asked, like, what's the gimmick? Is it the zipline? How much of an impact does it have? And this is something that I asked Volcano, and he sent like a massive quote about those kind of things. And he was basically saying that the gimmicks aren't necessarily safe for buying the teleporters. The gimmick is that there's no mids. The teleporters just help you play around that gimmick almost. Like it's an addition to the map to allow you to not have to rotate like crazy on the attack, right? And he sort of said, let me find it. In cases for Icebox, the premise or the gimmick isn't to do with the zip line specifically. It's more that it's complex combat space. It's kind of like what Matt said about if you're pushing on B as a defender, you are on your own. If you run into 4 attackers, you are screwed unless you've got the nuttiest aim, or you can pick those engagements or use the verticality to your advantage with the agent that you're playing. And just basically like, yeah, the zip line's there to like amplify that with the verticality and the quick fire action. But generally, that not every map is going to have like a teleporter or a door that closes or a zip line or even a specific gimmick. It's more how that map's meant to play. And I do think that Icebox is an okay map. It's just the fact that it's the 5th map. It's the first map we've had since launch. I think when it comes to content, people wanted more maps than agents. So there's a lot riding on this map being perfect. And like a lot of people have said in chat and even pros, they expect a bit of blowback and a lot of changes to this map when it gets into competitive play, which is not a good look right now.
It is good. It is a good design philosophy, though. So, like, you can the ideal, like how you mentioned there, Ryan, right? Like they design a map that forces different kind of gameplay changes and whatnot, which also kind of impacts agent design, right? Like certain agents will be better on certain maps than others. I also view that like Icebox is a map that has really long sight lines, probably will tend better towards like Vandal play than like Phantom play, right? With not like that many like close quarter engagements. Where I think if you're Valorant, you're Riot, you kind of look at it and it's like, okay, you can only affect the gun balance so much through numbers, right? You need to kind of design maps where guns and agents work better than certain on others, because you can't just constantly be in a flux of just changing these numbers around, whether it be like agent abilities, whatnot, to just try and make them viable overall. The goal would be to make them viable in certain situations, right? Like there should be certain situations in certain maps where you want Brim instead of Omen, right? You want Omen now instead of Brim on a map like this with verticality. I don't think you get there by adjusting numbers and tweaking to achieve that balance. You get there by map design and just kind of how you do like the design and just level of verticality and other things in the map to affect agent choice. I think that is the right path. I think it's just how this one will be received, which will be we'll have to wait and see.
I think that it's a lot of how are things going to settle, with a patch like this. And we also have the new agent. Obviously, we haven't touched on yet, Skye, who I believe by most measures is overpowered as all hell. Ryan, again, going to you. You had the opportunity to play the agent. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the most contentious part of a kit, the heal. Honestly, I probably used it about 5 times playing, and I got to play with like not only people like Mixwell and Looker, which is a bit of a humble brag. I've got a nice screenshot of me just doming Mixwell, but to be fair, I was baiting the entirety of Civilization in order to get the kill. But in any case, like, this is one of the sort of key things, and I think with Skye's kit, unlike the map, she's like a perfect addition right now. I don't think she's inherently overpowered because she doesn't do anything that only she can do. In fact, her kit is very much a hybrid between what the other initiators of Silver and Breach can do. And their level of play is super competitive. Her flash is great, by the way. The fact that it has a sound notification when you flash an enemy is so not only strong, but satisfying to use. But the reason why I think that she's pretty decently balanced is she's not better than Breach.
How many different blinds does she have?
She has 100 credits, and she can use 3 of them. So it's pretty ridiculous considering like what Breaches are 200 credits.
Imagine
whole...
how often you're going to be blind with like Breach, Skye, and Omen all in one team.
I mean, Paranoia is the one they need to. Yeah, Paranoia is the one they need to adjust. But the thing that I don't mind about Skye, watching at least, from a lot of the gameplay that I've seen, is that for her to use all of these kind of like blinds and abilities, it pretty much takes her out of combat, right? It's not like Reyna where you you can run, throw a Leer, and then you have your gun up straight away. Like to use your Wolf, to use your Hawk for the flash.
You can walk in with your utility. It seems like you have this. But it's going to be like the turret. You're going to have like all this shit happening on your screen. You're going to have birds and dogs and more birds flying around at you and shit like that. I mean, I'm not saying she's overpowered, but I'm thinking of like if I'm already getting flashed by a Breach and then a bird flies in and all of a sudden there's a dog and then I'm getting shot at by a bunch of different people. It's just going to be this is kind of my League of Legends mind coming in here, is with the on-screen elements being so not overwhelming, but like the density of shit happening on the screen is definitely increasing.
Yeah.
I also think smart players will just get around it. Like I just because she's an initiator. Sorry.
No, go. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, when it comes to like, because she's an initiator, it's kind of what you said before about the flashes and stuff, being able to move with it. But like Breach, it takes so long for you to get your gun out that you can't necessarily set yourself up. It's more about setting your teams up. But it's the fact that certainly now, Breach, even after being buffed, at like a 40% play rate in the Renegades tournament, which is like, middle of the pack. And there's going to be a lot of teams that are like, yeah, true. But I think there's a lot of teams that go, yeah, Breach is strong and you can see the potential. But they specifically as a player don't really vibe with him. Skye becomes then an option for them to play. Or for Silver, which is much more difficult because Silver's so like powerful and so high pick rate. The only map he's not played on is like Split and probably Icebox. In which case, those Silver players could then play Skye on that map because she'd work out a lot better there, right? So I don't think she's going to kind of come in and replace all of the Silvers and Breaches. But if there's teams that don't like to play Breach, they can run Skye. If there's teams that run a lot of Silver apart from certain maps, those players can play Skye. She's almost like a supplement as opposed to somebody like Killjoy that comes in and goes, I'm replacing you, Cypher. You've either got to like get with it or not. Like, she's just a great option to have that some teams might one trick, but others might be going, we prefer playing Silver and Breach, so we're going to stick with that.
I do worry, like, I think Moses, about just visual clutter, especially from, like, the observer POV, with both teams kind of playing the same exact agents and not, like, great kind of visual representation over whose utility is what at times. I think from, like, the casual point of view, right? I think, like, us, play the game a ton, watch the game a ton can kind of understand. But like to your point, Moses, now you're going to have like, there's birds flying in each direction, paranoia, smoke of the same kind of color all around sites.
Yeah.
It could get difficult for people to kind of distinguish like what is what, right? And what is actually happening in terms of the visual clutter, because there will be a lot happening within a small amount of space.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like a split mid. And all these other areas that were already super spammable. Imagine like raised grenades and birds and all these other things going on. I mean, I don't have to. Yeah, I don't have to play in the pro environment. Luckily, I made that choice personally, by the way. But as far as the actual concentration that you have to have. I think it'll really increase the mental load you have to deal with. But we'll see. I mean, the unfortunate aspect as we move along through this patch is that Act 3 also brought along a lot of problems, and this is the other side of the patch that isn't so glossy. Mainly stuttering. I actually haven't seen this video yet, so I would love to see what this actually looks like. I can see it. Yeah, it is. It looks like it's stuttering quite a lot. Let's slow it down.
Yeah, I've had it.
Yeah. It jumped. It looks like it kind of jumped ahead. Is it the old teleport, omen teleport into your screen type of situation?
Yeah, sometimes it's like your frames aren't in sync. It almost feels like.
Tap. Oh, you're dead. Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's a small amount of desync, and it just. I'm not sure if this is a network issue. It must be, right?
I don't really have a clue, to be honest.
Looks like a latency issue.
Yeah. I wasn't getting it, and then I did start to get it, and then it became super noticeable at times, where at first I was like, all right, this is just people just kind of complaining about their play in a way that doesn't make any sense. And then when I started to get it, I was like, oh my god, this is BS. Like, what the hell is this? It's just unfortunate that like this kind of comes in with the patch, but that's also kind of something that's going to happen in the work design from home environment that is COVID. I mean, it's almost like I feel like we've been in lockdown and like kind of work from home for so long that we just kind of like take things, being able to do things from home for granted. But you look at a game like World of Warcraft, right, which is trying to ship from home, and like they have a beta now that they had to push it back, and like just kind of it's very difficult to stay on track with the work from home design. Just the fact that they're able to get these updates out on time and deliver extra with a map is impressive. Where I think, at least personally, I'll take the stuttering or the game kind of being a little bit unstable for a week before it kind of gets back in sync with the content. Like I'd rather not be starved for content than kind of have the stuttering and whatnot, you know.
We're in this weird kind of position, and there's a couple other problems I'd like to highlight as well as I kind of go through this point. Obviously, Valorant is aware of what's happening. They've had to take Icebox out of ranked. They're dealing with audio bugs and that kind of thing as well. But at the same time, like I come from PUBG, which is arguably the most bug laden, poorly handled game, top tier game in recent memory. And to have this level of communication coming out from Riot is very, very nice to see, especially if it's admitting that there are issues that they're aware of, and they're hot fixing and all this type of stuff. But there is the reality that they have a schedule, and you better believe that a game company like this has a schedule for content delivery, and that unfortunately, due to COVID, that all these people that have to then work on and deliver that content are not in what I guess they would consider an optimal environment to be able to actually put this stuff out. So to Matt's point, it's impressive that they were able to get this out. But this is kind of, you're going to have to make a trade at some point. There's going to be some stability issues, but they do have the ability and the reaction time that kind of negates it in a way. And comparatively to other games that just ship busted updates, and we're like, well, we'll see you next Tuesday when we get this addressed or whatever. But problems occur, and I guess this leads us to the question: do you think, Ryan, there would be enough time on their schedule and with the feverish pace that players demand content, that a public test environment or a public beta environment would be useful for Valorant?
I think it's something that they've definitely considered. I think the main problem that you tend to run into, and I know this is definitely a problem with covering Overwatch, that people just don't tend to actually play it. Certainly when there's
nobody
balance changes on there. So it's one of those things where it's like, what's the point in setting everything up for something like that if people are just never really going to dive in? Sure, if it's a new map and a new agent, that's going to get more people more excited than just a typical balance change. But incentivizing people to play can often be pretty difficult However, I'm sure there's a way that you could just, get double experience in the battle pass, for example, or something like that. Like, I don't think there's necessarily too hard of a carrot to put on a stick for Valorant specifically on this. But I do feel kind of bad for them. You have to look at the other map that was added in the game, which was at launch with Ascent. Luckily, there was no ranked play for the first couple of weeks when the game launched, right? So it makes me consider that I hope they learn from this. So when map number 6 is added into the game, that they don't have these kind of problems. Otherwise, just don't have ranked for a week, because if it's ruining people's competitive experiences, that's going to be a nightmare. There were people complaining from the Renegades tournament that they were suffering from it. And it's lucky that that was only a 10K tournament, as bad as it sounds. If that's something like First Strike, which is 100K attached to it, at least for NA, that's a much bigger deal. And that's the difference between winning a tournament and bombing out in groups potentially.
I don't want to see a PBE. I think the PBE environment, like we've seen it on Overwatch, we've seen it on other games, nobody logs in to play it. It doesn't give valuable feedback for the development team. It doesn't help them make balance before this stuff goes live. What I want to see them do, or what I would like to see them do, is a lot like what Overwatch did with Overwatch League, is they have like a tournament client. So let's say, for argument's sake, Act 3 came out. Nothing in Act 3 really kind of impacts, private lobbies. Maybe have a separate instance of the game that exists on the last previous stable patch, right? And maybe it doesn't get updated to this patch until this patch is stable and ready to go, and there's like game-changing stuff in it. So you could still play things like the Renegades Tournament, like First Strike, on a balance patch that is stable, right? Let the mainstream still enjoy the content in a timely fashion. Even with bugs, I think most people would just say, give me the battle pass, give me the map, give me the agent. Like, let me just try this stuff out in a live setting. Also, it helps them kind of keep like that hype and build it up. But have a special kind of like tournament realm or tournament instance of the game that is stable. I know for Overwatch, for instance, right? Like, a ton of work goes into making sure the patch is stable before it gets updated onto the tournament client. So everybody has that, and it's stable and ready to go when it's ready to play on that update, right? They usually give themselves, a large window of time to be able to make that happen. I would like to see that, as opposed to, it's kind of spoiling all this stuff 2 weeks before for really not that much. I mean, people log in, they'll play it for maybe, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then that's it. You're not getting any type of feedback off of it. So maybe something like a tournament client instead.
I think that the severity, the quote unquote, I got to do very narrow quotes, there we go, very narrow quotes there. The severity of the bugs are not to me like, I think a lot of people are going to call them game breaking and stuff like that. That's a bit of hyperbole. But I fully believe that with the control that Riot seems to have over their product here, that this type of stuff is going to get rectified relatively quickly. And it's just our game development, man. Shit ain't going to work sometimes, or it's not going to work perfectly, and you have to deal with that. But considering some of the other stuff we've seen historically when things get broken, not that bad. So
this stuff happens.
So Act 3 is
PBE too.
Yeah, and like you said, like a lot of people say we need a public test environment so these bugs can be squashed before they ever arrive at the. Okay, but then like 55 people log into the test environment, you can't get a queue, and you're just like, fuck this, I'm going back to live. And then like I did that, I've done that so many times. Like I would be like, I want to see this new content, and you called it out too earlier. I think, or maybe it was you or Ryan who said that you don't want to spoil all your new content either. That kind of really sucks the wind out of your sails. When you're like, here everyone, you get a 2-week preview of things that we could announce and launch on the same day, that would, that kind of has that hype moment where we have a new agent and a new map and deathmatch is improved and competitive changes available now, instead of available in 2 weeks, but you can kind of try it now, limp along, and then you'll have a bit of a lead, and then some people will be confused as to what you're talking about where, and then it's in a perfect world, PvE would be doing its job, and everyone would be playing free beta tester for Riot and all that stuff, but it just ain't gonna happen. But what is gonna happen is we're gonna go to a short break, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna talk about First Strike. We're gonna talk about the Renegades Invitational, and we're gonna jump into why I think T1 is still bad. Okay, we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Valorant. I'm joined by Matt and Ryan. We've been talking a little bit about some of the changes, Act 3, all that stuff, but now it's time to look forward to First Strike, which is growing ever closer. Obviously we've started to get some of that information now as well. Most of it is just kind of logistic stuff. And now we are going to spend the next 45 minutes reading this from start to finish. No, I'm just joking. But so this is basically all the policies, the rules, and everything coming in here. I don't want to jump too in depth into this stuff because it's boring and shit in my opinion. But I mean, it is important to have. I guess I'll jump over to Ryan. I'm going to assume that you've read this already, and I'm going to put you on the spot. Anything important here that we need to know about?
Page to page, I read it. There's some cool stuff.
Okay.
I think Matt's brought up the agent stuff and the map stuff.
There we go. That's the
one thing is actually
Roman.
This is the stuff. I think this is not safe for work because this is some sexy scrolling happening. The one thing that Mike's mentioned in chat, and I know Mike's has done stuff with like analyst stuff for actual teams and stuff, so this is important. The bans, because a lot of the tournament stuff in First Strike is best of ones and best of threes. There is a best of 5 final, but for the most part, there's a lot of single limb best of ones. And the map ban process is quite interesting. Yeah, let's keep it going. That's it. So Team A, which I assume would be the highest. Yeah. Team A
processing
removes
all
2
of
of the
it.
maps from the 5.
Go ahead, Ryan. Go ahead.
So, like, there's going to be 5 maps, or at least there's going to be 4 for the start of it,
yeah.
which, again, Matt could probably touch on. So the Team A, the top seed probably in the qualifiers, will remove 2 of the maps, and then the other team will select which of the 2 or 3 maps that are left they want to play. And then, actually, there's a coin flip on who plays what side. It could even be the knife game on Icebox.
Coin flip.
We should definitely... So that in itself is interesting, but also for best of 3, this is the best thing about having 5 maps now. Team A bans a map, Team B bans a map, Team A then selects a map, Team B selects a map, and then there's only 1 map left, and there's a coin flip on who plays what side for that. So I actually think that's pretty decent, one of the better factors of having Icebox in the game. But I do feel that's
Tell me about this coin.
I don't know if it's too much
use?
of a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Probably a nice big golden one, I imagine. Like,
yeah,
it's right. It's like 10-cent gold.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. They from all the money they've made from all them skins, they've actually bought some.
Yeah.
They bought some bullion. They got nothing but the best goldsmiths out there to make like the Valorant symbol on one side and then like the raised paint shell on the other side or something like that. Give it a old flip.
That'd be cool.
That's that. I was hoping they would do something along like a CS:GO Lotto spin, except it's like Valorant Go Lotto sponsored, and they get some gambling in there. You know?
Oh man,
some amazing like CS adverts for Riot. That'd be an interesting one. I don't think it's happening, but I do wonder, like, if you're going to be a Team A and you get to ban 2 maps, is it just me or does that feel like super strong? Because you could go, we don't want to play Split, we don't want to play. Because we don't want to play Split.
Icebox.
We don't want to play Haven because the other team's really good at it. Probably Icebox as well, yeah. And then it's just those 3 maps in rotation.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you could see it going, right?
That's what I would be doing. Yeah, Split and Icebox every goddamn time.
Well, especially because some of the rules in there, so it's like 2-week buffer period for agents and maps. We'll have to see if they hold strong on that in terms of like what the reaction is. I think they should as well, at least for this first one, just to test the water. They need some kind of case test. I know pros are probably like, what do you mean test on us? Like in the first like major tournament, right? It's like but
only my career.
Yeah, it's only our careers, like why not? But with it being in the it would kind of like fall into, I believe, like the second qualifier for NA around that time when like Icebox or Skye could be in. So it could be a game changer. I think like if it were to be pushed back even like a little bit further, I don't think it should be like in the end. I think what they're calling it the main event, right? Like the final 8. It should not be involved in that if it hasn't been involved in any of the previous portion of it. But from what it seems like, it could definitely play a factor and be in that second open qualifier, which is a huge game changer, right? There's not a ton of time in between these qualifiers. I believe there's only like a week. And even then, it's not like you have the week off. It's like only like a few days in between them. Like it just begins the next week. So there won't be a ton of time to adjust, won't be a ton of time to game plan and kind of add Skye meaningfully into your rotation unless you have somebody who can pick up agents really fast. Uh, it's going to be make it even more important for teams if that's the case to qualify that first week, at least get top 8. 5 through 8, you'll still get an invite to the second qualifier with those 8 teams. So you at least want to be in that top 8. You do not want to be in a situation where you have to play through that open yet again with the new agent and the map potentially in the pool.
Right. Yeah, so we do have some dates here as well, and we're starting to get more of this type of information. Actually, well, we did get a kind of a dump over the last week or two of the various regions getting their schedules and what have you. So get your teams ready. I mean, that's all the time I really want to spend on this. Where I'm more excited to see the actual games play out and the storylines that will come from that. So the dates are out there, the rules are out there. Go read them, understand them, get ready, because Nerd Street Gamers and Engine Media have the first qualifier for North America. I think we have a little. Do we have a graphic for that? It looks like we do. So let's take a peek at that. So this is Nerd Street Gamers. They've been involved in Valorant since the very beginning. Obviously, they've been running all these different invitationals. They just did the Renegades Invitational a couple of days ago. So these are 128 teams that come through these bad boys. So that's a lot of teams and a lot of stories there as well. So obviously this starts in actually just a week from now. So this is this starts next on Monday of all days. And we'll go all the way through that all the way through the mid of next week, and then we start getting into the tournaments and the qualifiers and everything like that to determine who gets into the first strike event on December 3rd. So there's going to be 8 teams, and that's all you get, man. That's 128 down to 8. That's quite the journey. So good luck to all the teams out there. We also have Fortress Melbourne doing their qualifier as well. It's just cool to see. It's the new series of events is kicking off all around the same time. It's going to lead to not to a global event, but to regional champions. So especially in North America, that's probably going to be the biggest trophy you're going to be able to chase. Same with Europe for the foreseeable future, at least until we can all get together in person again. But if this is the next event that we're all looking forward to, the Renegades and Nerd Street Gamers Invitational was the last event that we will have until First Strike starts. And this one was interesting. And for those of you who didn't watch them, but to spoil it for you, Andbox won and Immortals did take second place. These were the groups. Some notable absences here. TSM and Sentinels would be the first teams I would think of. 100 Thieves also did not play in this. I did speak to someone close to the team who basically alluded that it was not in 100 Thieves' best interest to play in this because they didn't want to have any potential bad press going into First Strike, especially considering the high-profile nature of their roster. And this is the bracket as it played out. So what we don't see here, we do see actually a little bit, is T1 did beat Time In and Moon Raccoons. And I'm starting with T1 just because this is the team that I've been following from the beginning and had so many fans and whatnot. So T1 was able to beat 2 unsigned teams and then immediately drop out of the tournament as soon as they hit a pro team in Immortals. Even though Immortals is in the middle of a massive rebuild, I guess so you could say T1 is as well. So I guess all fair there. But T1 just dropped both maps and was out. I did not watch this series, so if there's more to color in there, that's great. But for me, the story here is on 2 sides. We have Andbox and we have T1, both comprised of similar, not DNA, but they have some of the same story tones there with former CS players coming across, getting matched up with some cracked out young guys and getting out there and getting it done. So Andbox wins the tournament. T1 goes out in quarters. Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I thought Andbox was extremely impressive. They've been kind of messing around with this roster for a while now. I believe it was the last qualifier for Renegades. They ended up playing with Boy and Poach, who they just added to the team. Before that, they were playing with Akis instead of Boy. So they pick up Boy as the Omen player. They looked much better incorporating him into the mix. I think Android had just like a tremendous event, though, just like popping off at every moment. But I think the difference is, like you mentioned, kind of comparing, if you're going to compare like Nbox to T1 with having some former Counter-Strike players on both sides of things. It seems like Nbox is playing way more Valorant and not trying to play Valorant like it was Counter-Strike, where I think
Right.
T1, just because of the nature, and honestly, it may just be because they have not gotten a ton of time like playing, kind of defaulting to a little bit more of like a CS style approach, which will work against some of the tier 2 teams, like your Moon Raccoons and whatnot. But you see with a team like Immortals, who really likes to up the pace around like shot up, it doesn't work as well. They're not able to like spread across the map and slowly take like positions and control, where a lot of these teams now are just like Immortals, right? That they move up with the boom bot, they throw in the leer, and then everybody's just funneling out, right? It's just fast hits after fast hits, just aggression. I think T1 probably looking back, they get that game against Immortals, they lose 2-0, but they can learn from some of that and try to incorporate some of that fast play into their game. Nbox, though, for a team that was together for only like 2 weeks before this, looked really, really clean with their execute.
Yep.
I think this is a team that definitely has a really high ceiling for the future.
I personally struggle a little, and I'm probably at some point going to be called a T1 hater. And I really have to underline the fact that I was as excited and am as still hopeful that T1 can turn it around and become the thing that they were supposed to be. But you did mention something there that still bothers me to this day. You did state that T1 didn't have a ton of time to play and didn't have a lot of opportunity to play. They had a lot of opportunity to play when the game first came out. There was tournaments that they were declining to play in because of reasons that it either wasn't worth it to them, whatever the reason was. Right. T1 didn't play enough, and teams like TSM and Sentinels and everyone left them in the dust because they were playing in everything. So they're at a point where they need to play in every goddamn tournament, and obviously they don't have a lot of time before First Strike happens. But it's an open qualified tournament. I mean, there's no invites, and there is a good chance that something happens to T1 through the qualifier, considering their inconsistencies. If they get a bad matchup or something early, they might just not make it at all. And at that point, that's a very real possibility. And at that point, you have to wonder, you're going to have T1's accounting team looking at the budgets and the money they're spending on this squad and being like, okay, does this make sense for us?
I think it's all about like what the expectations are, and I think it all kind of varies. Like I view FaZe as almost like in the same way, right? Like, do you judge them by what we've seen in Valorant from them, or do you judge them off of the potential that we've seen from them in other games coming into Valorant and where we expect them? Right. I think if you judge them in Valorant specifically, you're looking at a team like T1, and right now, if you're T1, like, you would be happy making the top 8. You would also be totally fine with the way they've looked, early on with putting together a team, like bringing Skadoodle back into the lineup, Spyder back in, here at like the last minute. Like, if you got anywhere like in the top 12, like, are you that upset? Like, considering you haven't, like you mentioned, they have not had a ton of like actual match experience, right? You can't replicate that in terms of scrims, or teams obviously pay way different in scrims.
Which really is the thing that tilts me.
Right, by choice, yeah. I think you have to kind of judge the teams just based off of how they looked in Valorant. I think FaZe as well. They looked much better than the FaZe Invitational. It's not really saying much. They didn't look good at all in the FaZe Invitational. But you can see. I think the difference is with FaZe, you see them kind of like trending and playing the game the right way. It just seems like they need more time. And I think you also look at just kind of the nature of Overwatch players in general. They're usually pretty good at adapting and picking new things up on the fly because there have been constant additions with abilities and different types of maps in Overwatch in the past. So an agent like Skye comes in, a map like Icebox, like these are types of players that you expect to be able to adjust and pick this stuff up and use it effectively straight away. Where I don't know if you would say the same about T1, but I think both teams are kind of in the same spot where the expectations, because of the organization, the players, may kind of overinflate what we expect of them just because of the history. Where I think if you kind of judge them just on what we've seen from them in Valorant, you would kind of say they're in about the spot you would expect them to be.
So are you saying that with even, and I'll bring Ryan into this discussion here as well. Ryan, do you believe that T1 is okay with I'm going to call them. They're barely in the top 10 in North America, if anything. I mean that this is a team that I promise you is costing them an absolute shitload of money every month, and they are going to be looking at like, okay, well, we have the quote unquote potential, but it hasn't really transferred over, and really, previous currency has no value here, in my opinion. You're paying for a Valorant team, and the Valorant team is underperforming. If you just took the labels off all the players and only looked at the score line, do you think that T1 makes the same move that 100 Thieves did, and just blows the team up and starts over again? Because it kind of feels that there's only so far you can get on previous accolades, and really, and I don't know and I don't know the guy, obviously, Skadoodle. My big thing with him is, my question has always been, if you get to the point mentally where you're going to retire and you have this very special win in the Boston Major that basically nobody else has, only 5 players have this Boston Major, the first North American team, all this stuff. How do you light that fire again? How do you get back to that competitive mindset? And in the case of Brax, like, he had a lot of potential, but he was on the shelf playing FPL for the longest time. Obviously had a little bit of a foray back into competitive experience. But how much of this mental hurdle of getting over the fact that you're not this plug and play #1 team? I don't know how they get past that until is it a mental thing at this point, Ryan? What do you think is going on with T1?
It's multifaceted, and I think if you look at each of the individual players, you get a different story, right? We'll start with Brax because he was the first player to be signed. He was pretty much signed around the time of TENS, and you look at the different directions that those two certain players went. TENS is just the carry monster for Cloud9.
Yeah.
A lot of people say he didn't have a really good tournament. They came third. He had like second on average combat score, and people were saying that he had a quiet tournament. Like that game against Immortals on Haven especially, he just carried the game on his back. He's an insane player. Brax, he went from playing Phoenix to Cypher. Like, I know that's Brax's playstyle. He is a lurker. He is more of a nuisance player. But that's the one thing that they're lacking. The fact that the player that stood up for this was the player that they just benched and then brought back. And he was the one that looked like the star player out of everybody else.
Pause this here, Daniel. People... I want to look at this. That is
shot up was just nuts all tournament long.
Yeah. Yeah, posting a plus 14
20 assists from Gangsta
as a brand new player, like,
yeah, dude, he was having games with like 200 ADR finishing at the end, just stuff that just made no sense. Just absolutely incredible games.
I just wonder.
I think Dazed is going to get a lot of flack. Like, I genuinely think that, like, because Dazed is one of those players that people love him or hate him, but I think he did okay considering the role. He is IGL in 2, but he just was a bit slow to everything. I think if it's difficult, right? Because you've got AZK that, again, was very passive. I mean, you could say that about all of T1, but you can only have either your Breach or your Silver playing very laid back and supporting the team. You can't have both these initiators waiting for something to happen. I'm pretty sure if the bind map against the Immortals had like an infinite timer, they would still be on fucking B long just waiting there for something to happen on attack. They were so passive and slow. And you've got Skadoodle trying to make plays. You've got Spyder just doing typical like Kriya 5-head Omen plays that people used to do like 4 months ago. So he's been read really clearly by the enemies. It's like they don't have anybody that's just kind of like what we said about Android and stuff. That's like, let's go. We're going right now. It's like, oh, we got to wait. I got to light up my recon ball. It's just, it's so slow, and people are just going to run over them if that keeps going.
I don't know though. Like, to your point before, Moses, like, all right, like, would they be happy with this type of performance? Like, I do wonder, like, what team they could have put together like this late in the game that would be better than this team they currently have.
They fucked it since the beginning, in my opinion.
Right, or just kind of like a team that would have a higher ceiling, like they could have built within the last, let's call it like a month, right? Either you probably were not going to get a team that outperformed this, and even if you did, they probably had a much lower ceiling and where they could potentially reach. I think if you're T1, and I view this the same kind of as FaZe, uh, you're invested in Valorant for the long haul. Whether it's
You've
with
kinda
this team
stuck.
or with most of the players on these two teams, etc. Uh, this is your first foray, right? You see how these teams go, see if they can hit this ceiling, hit this mark that you truly believe they can. And then I think you even give them like a little bit after first strike, right? You kind of see
No, you
how
have
they
to.
gel, how
You
they
can't
develop
change the
after.
team.
You have yeah, you have to. I think you have to kind of see this out until I know a very long time from now. You have to give this team like the coaching and the stability to be able to kind of form into what is their ultimate final form and see how that stacks up against some of these other teams. I don't think you can make moves off of this, and I think even if you did, it's not like you're a team like Immortals who has this robust kind of scouting system, and they have this like large index of tier 2 players that they really like and think that they can put into different roles. uh you're kind of just stuck for better or worse. I think you did see promising things though with Skadoodle. Like Skadoodle
Oh,
did
no,
play
for sure.
well
Yeah,
during Renegades.
definitely.
It's just they need to kind of get everybody else on that same page, right?
They have a lot of they have like there's no one in this in on Earth that has any idea about what's going on in Valorant that's going to call Brax or Skadoodle, AZK, even to an extent Dazed. They're not going to say that they're bad gamers. Okay, you can't say that.
No.
And at any given moment, can we pull up the stats, Daniel, from like them against Moon Raccoons and shit like that, the previous teams that they played against? And I kind of want to speak on the fact that T1 jumped in super hard and made the biggest splash the earliest. And then so many other teams just waited. They bided their time. They picked up, they picked up teams that were performing. I think the biggest one for me is the TSM signing. So let's take a look at the stats here. Like, I mean, to me, this is just one team is better than the other in this case. It's across the board. This team was just better. But as soon as they hit that competition at the Immortals level, it went the complete opposite direction. And AZK, if he's no longer carrying the, I never want to harp on anyone's individual stats because I've learned in talking to most of the players that people do things on teams that just don't reflect on the stat sheets, which is totally understandable, and I get that. But what T1 seems to lack is just cohesion. And and obviously Skadoodle had a good game or had a good series against Immortals, but he plays slowly as well. It's a matter of finding the right role for him. And considering how slow and some of the style that he plays, maybe they want to shuffle him over to the role of Killjoy's turret, where they can just set him up somewhere and just have him act as just that op sitting up on a box somewhere. But I mean, it's a strange flow. Like they have Fraud as a coach, and it just really feels that they came in, signed all these Counter-Strike players, and were expecting and are still playing Counter-Strike. It just hasn't evolved for them.
Yeah, what's interesting is like just kind of looking through some of their games from the tournament. They didn't play Raze at all. They didn't play any Reyna, which we saw a lot of Reyna. We saw like a lot of Phoenix as well during Renegades. And we didn't
No adaptability.
see them. No, they stuck with Omen, Jet, Cypher, Sova, Breach the entire time. Like that was it. And maybe it's something where they're saving some of those different looks for first strike.
Why?
But at that point,
why? How long have they been saving this shit for? Sorry to yell at you, Matt, but they've been sitting in the wings for so long. At that point, we don't want to show our strats. We only scrim our academy team. What are you hiding from? Like, are you like, is there some secret plot here? What's happening?
I mean, at that point, why do the Renegades tournament? Like, I mean, because this you could have used as like a huge launching pad for the team, right? Like, hey, we're playing much better. It's like, look, we beat Immortals. We had a good showing. Like, you could have used this as a confidence launching pad, but instead it's like just kind of fostered more of the same conversation that everybody's had around T1 for a few months now.
The exact reason why 100 Thieves didn't play in this tournament, by the way. I've got that like dead to rights. That's the exact reason why 100 Thieves didn't play in this tournament. Is they didn't want to have, like, even though they were confident, they didn't want to go into first strike with this looming, like, oh, they went out in quarters or they went out in semis or they didn't have a good showing. There was upside. T1 needed to show up here, but they really needed to be doing this type of stuff and having these learning experiences 6 months ago, like a long time ago. So it's unfortunate that T1 is still struggling with this, I don't want to say identity, but this burden of expectation that is never going to go away unless they start performing.
Both maps were close though
just gonna get
against
worse.
Immortals. I mean, 2 13-11 games like is fairly close, but yeah, to your point, I mean, look at the conversation that people have around Cloud9. We had it the other day when we were doing plot chat. It's like, oh well, like you worried about Cloud9 going into First Strike, and I'm like, no, not really, because they end up losing a final map to Immortals barely, who ends up going on and playing in the finals. They lose a BO1 to Anbox, who wins the entire thing, and they dump trucked everybody out. They lose to two teams. They lose to two teams who were clearly like on the cusp of tier 1, like top 8 type of potential, and they lose to one extremely close. You can make an argument if they go up against, Ambox, who they played really close. You could easily be talking about Cloud9, like whether it's in second or first place the entire tournament, right? I think it's a little bit different as well because we have seen consistent play from Cloud9. I mean, we've seen tens just pop off in everything he's pretty much entered. So I don't think you can kind of have those same questions about Cloud9 as you do like a T1, right?
Yeah, and Ryan,
one other thing about
every
T1.
Sorry, and I want to preface this one thing real quick, Ryan.
Go on.
I guess, and we haven't seen this from T1, and I want to put this to you, Ryan. Every other team has pass or fail evolved in some way since we first started watching professional level Valorant. T1 has, in my opinion, not evolved, and now I'll let you go into your point.
I think there were really bright moments, I suppose, but there was one thing, as somebody that casted the game against Timing, which is Ninja's team, they actually did pretty well in it, to be honest. Like, they actually did okay. They, on their attacking halves, only got 4 rounds. They constantly went 8 and 4. And then and then the defended side, they would also win 8 rounds on defense. So a lot of the time, they went into halftime with a big, like, round differential, and you're thinking, like, they're miles ahead, they look so good. And then they attack, and the other team, even time in, caught up and made it a super close game. So there's like a clear indication that, yeah, their attacking side is the easiest part of what's going wrong for them because they just look so uncomfortable attacking. They just wait for a bus, an opportunity to come that was just never going to come on its own. Like, they, a lot of the time, will just sort of sit. I mentioned before, like sitting on B long on Ascent. A lot of the time, 30 seconds can pass and they are still literally by where the spawn doors would open. They just like to sit back so much, expecting the defending team to just throw themselves at them and they can get an easy frag and go over to B. A lot of the time, Spyder would have to teleport somewhere just to try and catch them out, and then they would use that to their advantage, right? So, yeah, their attacking side was just dog. That was one of the main parts, and a lot of the stuff I think that went wrong for them is a straightforward fix. I think, yeah, their identity has struggled, and they've even swapped over agents and dropped Skadoodle for a bit because it wasn't working. But Scar's Jet Operator worked a lot more. The nerfs seem to have benefited him the most out of everybody else because he does play it so passively on the defense with an op. But everybody else seemed to be comfortable in their role. Yeah, it's just AZK and Dazed because they're playing that supportive initiator role. I think one of them needs to try and help with entry frags, or at least following somebody else that's trying to entry. Because Skadoodle has it all in his shoulders to try and make so much happen.
They need to schedule an interview, I think. They need to have, like, Skadoodle interview one of the devs and pass along all the changes he wants so we can get his patch. And that way we can get some T1 movement. I know I feel really guilty because we have been talking so much about T1. Obviously, I just love talking about T1. But we have to talk about the fact that Anbox put this team together and won their first tournament. So, like, if you have T1 on one side, you have Anbox on the other, who came out and won their first tournament, which definitely led to Poach getting signed today. Does that make 5? I don't know if they have their 5 all signed up now, but I definitely believe they have 4 out of 5.
They have 4, yes.
Yeah, 4 out of 5.
You would assume they sign Boy, right? After this type of performance. This is a team that's... Yes, they do.
Because, like, First Strike's next week, they need to lock in the squad.
Yeah, I mean, you assume he'll be on the squad for First Strike. It's extremely impressive that they're able to put this team together. And this is a team we saw some interesting stuff from, right? Like, we saw Poach play the Viper consistently here on Split throughout the weekend. But, I was going to say, you kind of look at Android, right? And he's the one who really kind of, like, pops off, like, carries a lot of the weight. but a lot of these players like had major clutch moments. Like a lot of like I mean there was one round like late in the game on Split where you had a poach clutch like a 2v1 over at the A site. Seb was really strong on the Cypher pretty much all tournament long. Uh, and this is a team that, with only 2.5 weeks or so of play, you think can get much better. I think it's a team you definitely have to be worried about if you're at the top of an A.
Yeah, it's where the floor is. Like that's the thing that's the contrast is you have Andbox who having early success is always a good thing. You got the win at your back now and you have that first win. You don't really like that's what you're chasing. You want that first tournament win as an organization. I think everybody in this one has had that moment. Like obviously TSM and Sentinels again were not present here, but to have it in this fashion so quickly and to have it right before first strike, it's the best possible scenario for Andbox from a mentality standpoint. Is to have this new team win their first tournament in a very obvious fashion, and ultimately they have a great storyline now. And I really can't wait to see if this success is one of those. Like maybe this is the next TSM, maybe it's the next Sentinels, which is what everyone's chasing. They want to be in that discussion because as we saw back at that Phase Invitational, where that had such great viewership, is that it's these storylines that really drive the interest in all esports, and I think that's what T1 really wanted a piece of when they jumped in head first like they did with their roster. But from a eye test standpoint, Mr. X, I'm calling Mr. X against it. I'm Matt, but what do you think? What do you think of the? Like? What is your eye test? Is this just the beginning for this team, or is this luck of the draw, missing opponents? So what do you think? Is this a big juicy victory, or just a good win for them going into first strike?
I think it is. I think this is the beginning of something here for Andbox. I say that because I know kind of like the organization, like come from like they do the New York Excelsior and Overwatch, they do the Subliners and CDL. They're really invested almost in the same way like Immortals is like trying to like figure out like, okay, we bring in Android and yay, we build around these players, right? Then we add Seb, like let's try some other players. Poach now seems like he's a mainstay. Let's try to find a good fit for this, right? Doesn't work with Akis. Now we have Boy in the mix. We're playing better. Okay, let's try and ride this out. And they also seem like a team, at least from their performance here in Renegades, that is not afraid to kind of go outside the box in terms of what teams are currently doing. Running the Viper consistently on Split when Viper doesn't get played by anybody else. Seeing them kind of just try different things in terms of strategy kind of tends you to believe they have even more things in the box for First Strike. And I think the way that they got these wins, right? They beat Cloud9 in a BO1. The Immortals series is a 2-0, although Split, they have a huge lead that they end up blowing, which is it got super dicey for a while. In the fashion that they won, I think it was a really good win for this team, and I think one that they can definitely build off of now.
Ryan, final thoughts on the Renegades tournament?
This is exactly what we needed before First Strike. It was a great primer to some of the roster changes. You had two teams that came through the qualifiers coming first and fourth, like Moon Raccoons did seriously well, but it's also pretty damning to T1, as we sort of mentioned. They lost to Immortals, but that's still a relatively new team. The only team that was sort of the top four that had stayed together the longest was Cloud9, who I think still did decently. Their game against Immortals was insane. But Gen G losing to Moon Raccoons, T1, as we've highlighted, FaZe, it's pretty damning for them to be losing out to teams that have been together 2 weeks. I know Pansy said before that it's going to be like a year before we get those like pure Valorant players. This is the start of it. Not only that, you've got the announcement of leaderboards today of like who's the top 100 players in NA and EU and across all of the other different regions. This is where it starts. And I think First Strike, I can see, 16 teams get into the qualifiers? 4 or 5 just being, who are these guys? And they're not cheating. I mean, like legitimately, like players you've never heard for, putting together a team of 5 players and just getting to a distance and knocking out some big teams. It's starting right now.
Absolutely.
Mentioned those.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, he mentions the leaderboards, and I think it's funny because over time in Overwatch, you've seen a lot of teams pick players out of the ladder who it's like, hey, this guy is always in my games. He's always playing like well. Like, what if we got him in the team environment? And those players have transitioned into becoming all-stars, MVP candidates. And those are the type of players you were talking about earlier, Moses, right? Players who are Valorant players, right? They're out there at home right now. Maybe they play in a duo. They rank all the way up, right? They're playing against pros consistently, but they don't like have that into the pro scene, whether it's like somebody on a team that they know well enough to give a shot or a coach or something. That with systems like leaderboards, they can now be found by groups like an Icebox or Immortals and given that shot and show like, hey, there are players out there playing this game actively that can make a difference at the pro level that just haven't been given a chance yet.
Yeah, and unfortunately, some of these experiments are going to have to come to an end. Like that's the really rough part is that there's. I think the reason why we spend so much time like lamenting the performance of teams that are not at where we want them to be, either the storyline of a 100% PUBG roster, or the iBuy Power revival. Like it's all about stories, and sometimes stories just don't go the way you want them to. So we have many chapters still in this story analogy, but they don't start for another 2 weeks. So we have to, or well, actually, they start in 6 days. So
Yeah.
that's gonna be really exciting to see. We're gonna have to follow along, and you better believe that we're gonna be here next week talking about the initial results from First Strike. So I have to thank you, Matt and Ryan, for joining me here. Can't wait to have you back on the show. You can watch
Yeah.
Valoranting every week at twitch.tv/DNP at 11 Central. Matt, final words for us as we close things out.
Oh man, I'm so excited that First Strike is actually going to start to begin. I feel like we've been waiting for tournaments like in NA for a while. Renegades was just kind of like the tip of the iceberg in terms of like seeing teams compete again and getting back into it. It'll be really nice to have a few weeks of consistent play in all regions to be able to come on and talk about. So just excited for the future, though the really close future of next week, right? Being able to see the top teams play again.
Absolutely. And Ryan, I'm gonna go ahead and yoink your ability to give. No, I'm just joking. So any shout outs, any final words for our viewers out there before we wrap things up?
Just to you guys, I think like First Strike is like the main sort of premiere of it, and like I mentioned, I remember the first episode with Pansy and Scoots that I watched. I think I pretty much watched every week since. So it's been great to see podcasts like this grow and the audience for Pro Valorant to come in. But like it's exciting, sort of on the eve of like the biggest stuff that we've seen so far across all of the regions and NAU specifically. I'm excited to see more people, more casual fans come into Pro Valorant. As somebody that makes a lot of casual content myself on the game, there's a lot to be excited about, and I just can't wait.
Absolutely. We are at the precipice of the next stage of the beginning stages of Valorant, and there's so much more to come. So First Strike right around the corner. We'll be here to cover it. Check us out again, twitch.tv/DNP. You can follow us on Twitter and on YouTube as well for the VODs if you want to watch them. And also pick us up anywhere podcasts are found. We'll see you guys next week on Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific time. And until then, see you guys out there. Have a great week, everybody.